John Romita Sr. is an American comic book artist who not only created massive comic book characters like the Punisher, Mary Jane, Luke Cage, and even Wolverine, but he is also Marvel's art director for many years, shaping Marvel Comics and its direction throughout the 1970s and 1980s. His artwork spans 7 decades, and his work on Amazing Spider-Man made it Marvel's best-selling comic book series of all time. John Victor Romita was born in 1930 and grew up in Brooklyn, New York, in a family of Sicilian heritage. Despite his father, Victor Romita, being a baker and expecting his son to follow in his footsteps, John's parents supported his passion for drawing. He gained recognition in his Brooklyn neighborhood for his chalk drawings on the sidewalk. During his school days, Romita would embellish the halls with his artwork during seasonal celebrations and create backgrounds for school plays. As part of the first generation of American children engrossed in comic books, John Romita immersed himself in the world of sequential art. At the age of 14, he enrolled at the School of Industry Arts in Manhattan, where he learned from notable illustrators like Howard Simon and Ben Clements. On his 17th birthday in 1947, Romita graduated from the school and received his first art assignment from an anesthesiologist at Manhattan General Hospital. He earned $60 a week by creating artwork for a medical exhibit on pneumatology medicine. Following this experience, he secured a position at Forbes Litho, a New York City firm. Although his primary role was that of an office messenger boy, he also contributed by drawing images of bottles, glasses, and Santa Clauses for the Coca-Cola advertisements. During the 1940s, Romita also ventured into the realm of comic books. His first paid story, a romance tale, was completed in 1949 for Steve Douglas, an editor of Eastern Color's Famous Funnies. However, the editor kept it stacked on his desk and it never made it to print. Douglas was known to give young and up-and-coming artists some experience, even if their art didn't meet the standards for publication. Romita recalled, "The first story he gave me was a love story. It was terrible. All the women looked like emaciated men, and he bought it and never criticized it, and he told me to keep working. He paid me $200 for it and never published it, and rightfully so." Around the same time, Romita coincidentally encountered his high school friend Lester Zakarin on the subway ride. Zakarin worked as an inker for comic books and realized he could secure more work if he also handled the penciling. He offered Romita $17 to $20 a page to pencil 10-page stories for him as an uncredited ghost artist. For the next year and a half, Romita became a ghost artist, which they collaborated on crime, horror, and other genre-based comic stories for publishers such as Timely Comics, Avon Publications, and a few others. His time with Zakarin came to an end when he was drafted into the U.S. military. From early 1951 to July of 1953, John Romita fulfilled his military service in the U.S. Army. Rather than being deployed to the Korean War, he was stationed at Governor's Island in New York Bay, where his task was to create recruitment posters. During his free time, Romita continued his work in the comic industry, this time directly under the guidance of editor Stan Lee at Timely's new established line of comic books, Atlas Comics. It was during this period that he gained his first experience in inking his own artwork. Between 1951 and 1957, John Romita contributed illustrations to various genre-based comic books, including war titles such as Battle, Battle Action, Marines in Battle, War Comics, suspense titles like Menace, mystery titles like Mystery Tales, romance titles, and Western adventures like Western Kid and Western Outlaws. He enjoyed an extensive tenure on the Western Kid, where he played a part in the character's creation and illustrated lead stories in the initial 17 issues from 1954 to 1957. His first credited work as a penciler and inker came from the story The Bradshaw Boys and Western Outlaws No. 1, February of 1951. In 1953, Romita teamed up with Stan Lee to revive the wartime superhero Captain America, originally created by Jack Kirby and Joe Simon. The character initially appeared in 2 issues of Young Men in issue 23 and 24, before returning to his own standalone comic book, which had been on hiatus since 1950. The revived stories portray Captain America as a commie smasher, engaging in battles against Soviet adversaries. However, the public's interest in superheroes was waning, coupled with a widespread opposition to the Korean War. As a result, the patriotic sentiment that once resonated with the audience during World War II failed to be replicated. After just 3 issues, from May to September of 1954, the title was once again canceled. It was also during this time Romita would render one of his first original characters, M11, the Human Robot, in a 5-page standalone sci-fi story in Menace 11 in May of 1954. In 1957, as the comic industry was seeing a rapid decline, editor Stan Lee was forced to close down a majority of Atlas titles and release many of the artists associated with them. Subsequently, John Romita decided to try his luck at DC Comics, where he'd been working freelance there on some romance stories since 1953. At the time, DC Comics held the dominant position in the comic book market. Romita referred to them as the Cadillac of comic books. With romance comic books now on the rise, Romita switched over to doing those exclusively, with his first comic being credited for was Heartthrobs number 63. From late 1957 to late 1965, Romita served as a lead artist for DC's romance comic line, which encompassed titles like Falling in Love, Girls' Love Stories, Girls' Romance, Heartthrobs, Secret Hearts, Young Love, and Young Romance. In addition to illustrating numerous stories, Romita also served as a primary cover artist for all these titles. While most of the stories were standalones, there were a couple reoccurring characters introduced in 1963, including airline hostess Bonnie Taylor and registered nurse Mary Robin. Working on romance comics provided Romita with the opportunity to infuse pages with subtlety, drama, and emotion, even in the absence of intense action. He became renowned for jazzing up his artwork by incorporating elements such as flowing hair, flowing scarves, and the movement wind blowing leaves or curtains. However, by 1965, romance comics had been declining in popularity, and DC had decided to stop buying any new romance art. They recently found a huge inventory of unused art and stories, and decided just to use that for their new issues and also do reprints. Romita's last known DC story work was a 6-page story called My Heart Tricked Me in Girls' Romance number 121 in December of 1966. Romita returned to Marvel with his initial contribution as an inker for Jack Kirby's cover and Don Heck's interior pencils in the superhero team comic The Avengers number 23 in December of 1965. Romita got a job offer from an ad agency that offered him a salary of $250 per week, surpassing the approximate $200 he earned from working on romance comics. However, when Stan Lee got wind of this offer, he knew that Romita was too good and he couldn't let him go, so he gave him a very compelling offer to stay. He promised to match the agency's salary and, best of all, granted Romita the freedom to work from home or at the office based on his preference each day. Originally, Romita said that he would take the offer but would only ink, not pencil. But Stan Lee figured later he could persuade him to pencil. One day, Stan showed Romita a Daredevil splash page by Dick Ayers and asked him how he would redraw it. Romita decided to do a few pencils and Stan loved it. Romita then became the main artist on Daredevil number 12 in 1966. Usually a low seller for Marvel, Daredevil comics started to perk up and even became Marvel's highest percentage of sales compared to its print run, meaning when they sent them to the newsstands to be sold, most got sold and not returned back to the distributors. Steve Ditko, who co-created Spider-Man, suddenly left Marvel out of creative differences, so that left Stan Lee to look for a new artist for the Spider-Man comic line. He thought he would give Romita a chance by asking him to do a 2-part story with Spider-Man to guest appear in Daredevil number 16 and 17. Stan Lee was blown away by how he handled Spider-Man, and after that, he reassigned Romita to the comic that would end up defining his career. After issue 19 of Daredevil, Romita left and started drawing Spider-Man on issue number 39 in 1966. Believe it or not, people laugh when I say this, but I did not want to do Spider-Man. I wanted to stay on Daredevil. The only reason I did Spider-Man was because Stan asked me and I felt like I should help out like a good soldier. I never really felt comfortable in Spider-Man for years. I felt obligated to mimic Ditko because I was convinced in my own mind that he was going to come back in 2 or 3 issues. I couldn't believe that a guy would walk away from a successful book that was the second highest seller at Marvel. After 6 months, when I realized it wasn't temporary, I finally stopped trying to mimic Ditko. The Amazing Spider-Man had been Marvel's second best-selling title at the time Romita began drawing it. Within a year, it overtook Fantastic Four to become the company's top seller. Romita created many characters during his Spider-Man run, including the Rhino, Kingpin, Shocker, even redesigned Mary Jane. He used Anne Margaret from the movie Bye Bye Birdie as a guide, using her coloring, the shape of her face, her red hair, and her form-fitting short skirts. Until 1973, Romita worked almost exclusively on the Spider-Man. If not a penciler, then a layout artist and an inker for either Don Heck, Jim Mooney, or Gil Kane. Until 1977, he also did most of the title's cover art. Starting in January of 1977, John Romita was also the original artist for the Amazing Spider-Man newspaper comic, distributed as both a daily and Sunday feature through the Register and Tribune syndicate. Romita promised Stan Lee that he would continue the strip as long as it continued to grow. It ended up peaking in its fourth year and reached over 500 newspapers, becoming one of the most popular adventure comic strips at the time. Romita stopped doing the newspaper comic on November 10th in 1980 and was succeeded by Larry Leiber, who continued to draw the feature until 2018. By 1973, Stan Lee had taken the position of president and promoted Romita to the position of art director. Romita played a crucial role in shaping the visual identity of Marvel Comics and contributed significantly to the creation of new characters. His design and skills were instrumental in the development of iconic characters such as the Punisher, Wolverine, Luke Cage, Bullseye, Tigra, and Brother Voodoo. When designing Wolverine, Romita drew inspiration from the encyclopedia description of Wolverines, envisioning them as fierce, compact creatures with sharp claws. For the Punisher, Romita took a rough sketch provided by writer Gary Conway, which featured a skull and crossbones on the chest, and transformed it into a more dynamic and striking design. He enlarged the skull, extending it to cover Punisher's entire torso, aligning the cheekbones with his pectoral muscles, and crafting a belt buckle that resembled menacing teeth. Additionally, Romita was responsible for creating Natasha Romanoff's Black Widow outfit, drawing inspiration from the character Miss Fury. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, he focused mainly on his art director duties, but occasionally he would ink or pencil a comic, mostly Spider-Man titles. He even did the cover to Hobgoblin's first appearance, which was created by his son, John Romita Sr., in Spider-Man issue number 238, and penciled a 9-page story in Amazing Spider-Man number 365, the 30th anniversary issue. But most of his time went towards Marvel's Special Project Department, which took care of the production of children's books, coloring books, and other brand expansions, such as merchandise. Together with Jim Shooter, they set up an art apprentice program for new artists that joined the Marvel Bullpen, a group that became known as Romita's Raiders. While Romita mainly did the corrections on the cover art, the Raiders worked on corrections on the interior pages and were uncredited. In the midst of the comic book market collapse in the mid-1990s, Marvel was faced with major financial problems and had to do major cutbacks. Romita was entrusted with the responsibility of coaching others on the process of letting people go. He was devastated with the task of letting people go, so that following Christmas of 1995, he made the difficult decision and quit Marvel. Throughout the late 1990s and the 2000s, Romita would still come back to do the occasional cover or story, such as Iron Man, Daredevil, and of course, Spider-Man. Among his final jobs were variant covers for the Amazing Spider-Man issues 568, which was in October 2008, and 642, which was in November of 2010. He had two sons, one of them John Romita Jr., who became a very good artist himself and has worked in the comic industry for decades. Actually, his first contribution to Marvel Comics was the creation of the Prowler when he was just 13 years old. On June 12, 2023, John Romita died in his sleep at his New York home at the age of 93. In the world of comic books, few artists have left such a permanent mark as John Romita Sr. With a career spanning 7 decades, Romita co-created so many of the iconic characters we see and love today. His impact on the comic book world was immeasurable. His artistic skill and creative vision helped define the Marvel Universe, and his dedication and passion inspired countless artists and fans alike. With his passing, the comic book community mourned the loss of a legend, whose legacy will continue to live on through his extensive body of work for all of us to read and enjoy.
Issue Spider-Man that you remain proudest of?
Two continuing stories, 108 and 109. I'll tell you why. Because I always felt like a visitor on Spider-Man. Like I was always doing Ditko somehow. I was trying to keep the character consistent. Then I'm different. I'm a different person. I enjoyed myself. I took my number 5 brush out and I did Milton Caniff all over those pages. And there are scenes in there that I'm very proud of. I wish I had kept the originals.